everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this Fireside Chat. My name is Mairead Lavery. I'm the President and CEO of Export Development Canada, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here at the Conférence de Montréal, where I'm delighted to see important conversations on the global economy, innovation, international cooperation, and sustainability. Today, I have a really unique privilege to be speaking with an absolutely extraordinary leader. Mr. Peter Grauer is the chairman of Bloomberg, a company that is very familiar to all of us as a global business, financial information, and news leader. Peter's impressive career spans leadership in media, finance, technology, healthcare, and philanthropy, just to name a few. Now, one thing that stood out for me in preparing for this interview is Peter's long-term commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace. And I'm certainly excited to explore that topic with Peter in this conversation. And I also look forward to tapping into Peter's expertise, his experience, his knowledge, and his insights as we discuss the year that was and leadership in a period of great change. Peter, welcome to Conférence de Montréal. Thank you for joining us.
Mairead, thank you so much. This is a huge pleasure and honor for me, and I'm very flattered with your introductory comments. You went way overboard, greatly appreciated, so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Peter. And I think our biggest challenge today is going to stick to the time because we have so many subjects that we could share. And I'm sure anyone listening in is just really listening avidly to what you're going to share with us. So let me start, Peter, with something that I mentioned in my opening comments around reflecting on the year that was 2020. And there's no doubt that there has been so much change during 2020, whether it's to our day-to-day lives, in our business lives, or to the economy in general. Everything's been reimagined. So Peter, as we head towards the end of 2020, what are you reflecting on for the year that was?
Well, I think several things, and we all have our own personal views because it's been such an extraordinary voyage for literally the last almost 11 months. I reflect on the way, certainly in our company and many other companies, people kind of had an all hands on deck mentality. It didn't matter what part of the firm you worked in, they all were pushing towards a common goal. And I think we owe our colleagues a huge amount of gratitude for everything that they've done. You know, when we kind of look outside of what we are engaged in on a daily basis, I have extraordinary admiration for the healthcare workers who really got us through this period of time. They were exposed to something that no one really knew about. They handled it with grace, put in endless hours, and it's just been really, really remarkable. I think the third thing that I would say that has amazed me, because like you, we've been working from home since the middle of March effectively, although I was in the office for a couple of days in 4 or 5 successive weeks. And that is the intensity of what we've been doing day in and day out. Many people like me start at this morning is a perfect example. I started with Asia at 7 o'clock this morning, and I'll finish this afternoon at 6 o'clock with colleagues on the West Coast, and very few breaks in between. And so everyone has been exposed to that. And we have been very focused on making sure that people are focused on their personal well-being, their mental health, taking breaks, getting away from their desk and things like that. The last thing that I would say is with, again, a deep sense of gratitude, I think we owe the scientific community a huge debt because they have really mobilized. I'm on the board of Rockefeller University in New York, which is maybe the leading biomedical research organization in the world. And we have teams of people that have been working diligently ever since the virus was identified to try and come up with a vaccine and a procedure to be able to produce that vaccine with commercial partners and get it out into the marketplace. And so we kind of reflect back, and it's been a year that's gone by amazingly quickly and incredibly intense. But I think people have also shown the really good side as they've been considerate of others and really discharged their responsibilities without second guessing or without in any way drawing back from what they've been asked to do.
Peter, I love that you went to the sense of individuals and how individuals can contribute and how they have been, whether it's as employees, as frontline health workers, researchers for scientific, because this has really truly been a different crisis, one that, individuals can make a difference in their day-to-day activities throughout the crisis. So I love that you went there in terms of your reflections on 2020. Now, if I'm going to try and bring you back up to like a business level, and then we'll come back down again to employees and maybe to your own very personal reflections. From a business perspective, you mentioned the vaccine, of course, which we're hearing some really positive news in Canada that has now been certified, and we certainly hear some news in the US as well. So good news on the vaccine front. We know we're looking at a long tunnel, but what should businesses be focused on right now, given still the challenges and the uncertainty that exists in the economy?
Well, I think the number one focus, and it's certainly this on behalf of many other business leaders, almost regardless of where they are geographically, first and foremost, our number one priority has been the people that come to work at Bloomberg every single day. And I have said innumerable times to my colleagues that we cannot over-communicate with people around the world. We need to make sure that in that over-communication, we're identifying whether we're seeing any stress or strain that could result in mental health related issues. And if we do identify them, make sure that we're getting our HR people plugged in and on top of the situation very, very quickly. And so priority number one, I think for all of us, is making sure that we're taking care of our employees. Priority number two is obviously dealing with our clients around the world. We are in a unique position where we have provided a technology solution for people to move from working in the office to working from home in the financial markets. And we did so in a number of different ways, by giving free trials, by providing disaster recovery capability, and a number of other things, and making sure that they could connect with their colleagues, that they could connect with their clients and connect with the markets and continue to operate in the markets as smoothly and efficiently as they possibly could going forward. So that's been a very big focus for us. At the same time, making sure that we're continuing to think about the future and develop new solutions and capabilities to facilitate work being done in the capital markets and the information markets around the world. The third thing that I would say, we went to great pains to take care of our vendor partners around the world. And one of the things that I am most proud of, and this is all Mike Bloomberg, and really to a large extent kind of the genius of the way Mike thinks about things, but we had been meeting as a management committee, pardon me, on a daily basis since the middle of March. And about 2 or 3 weeks into that process, Mike turned to us and said, we pay our vendors around the world, and we have thousands of them. We spend billions of dollars a year through them. We pay them on between 60 and 90 days. You know what we're going to do? We're going to pay them in 3. And what that did, as you know, Mairead, is it dramatically accelerated their cash flow, minimized, in some cases, eliminated the need for working capital, and really made a difference in terms of their ability to continue to function and employ their colleagues, but also interact in the markets going forward. And then the fourth thing from our perspective, you may or may not be aware of this, but at Bloomberg, we work to an ultimate higher purpose, and that higher purpose is 85 cents of every dollar of value that we create for Mike Bloomberg, who owns 85% of the company, basically goes into his foundation. And the foundation, in conjunction with Bloomberg employees through what we call our Best of Bloomberg community outreach programs around the world, have funded almost $350 million worth of programs in different environments around the world. We've done over $40 million to basically accelerate things in Africa, which we thought would be a series of communities that would be underrepresented. And we've done things in the U.S., particularly in contact testing in New York State, but all over the country and lots of different places around the world. And I think that has been really important in facilitating the ability of people to get through this very difficult period of time when we all were essentially untested when we started.
Well, Peter, you've given us a lot to think about there. So you've talked about a lot of the stakeholders for your company, whether it's your employees, your vendors, your customers, and even the wider community. And certainly this is something that I'm hearing. I think you talked about it there with purpose. Like, I hear a lot more CEOs talking to me about the mental health of their employees, the personal and protective equipment, and talking about how they recognize how integrated they've become with their customers and their supplier, and the need to bring that cohesion even to the pandemic response. So very interesting that I see more companies focusing on their community than necessarily their own company during this time.
Yes.
Yeah. So Peter, with that in mind, and reflecting that, every challenge and every crisis also represents an opportunity. There's lots of talk now as we end 2020 about how do we build back better would be some of the terminology. There's discussions around a green recovery. There's also talking about how do we build and capitalize on the resiliency that people have shown and businesses have shown during 2020 to go for the future and to move our economy forward? Do you have a perspective on that, on how we could increase resiliency for future challenges or future crises?
Well, I think, as is the case with similar events like this that have occurred in our lifetime, and certainly in my professional lifetime over the last 50 years, I think again in our company, and I think I speak for many of the people who will be at the event that you and I are participating in, is that we learn from these experiences and we prepare ourselves a little bit differently for the next time around. And so I think we'll all be more mindful of health and well-being of employees to make sure that we minimize the risk of being infected by the virus. We'll, I think, create more community outreach. I think more interaction with the medical and medical research community going forward to make sure that we understand what they're thinking about and how we should prepare as business leaders, our colleagues within our companies, but as you said before, the other stakeholders that we're involved in going forward. So I think the level of sensitivity to a broader range of kind of black swan events and what those challenges mean with regard to continued responsible execution in the markets in which we operate around the world is all an outcome of what we will have learned in 2020 and presumably the first half of 2021 as the vaccine becomes more commonly distributed and we are able to take advantage of it and we get back more to a kind of a business as usual environment, similar in a large part to what it was before we went into lockdown in March of 2020.
Yeah, we're seeing that as well, Peter. Certainly more people talking about stress testing and how they think about these things, although I'm not sure any of us ever had the imagination to think of a global pandemic. So let me change topics a little bit, Peter, because I'm interested, as much as we're struggling with this world, once in a lifetime, hopefully global pandemic, we've also seen 2020 give rise to other issues in our population. And the one I think that we refer to is the issue that arose on Black Lives Matter and systemic racism, in both of our countries, actually. How can we as leaders help with respect to advancing the agenda for inclusion, diversity, and equity?
I think the single most important thing, and I say this because I have the experience associated with it, is that the tone has to be set at the top of the organization. The very senior leadership, and in my particular case, just to use that, if you don't mind, as an example, I've always been an advocate for diversity and inclusion, but it kind of dawned on me in April of 2014. Mike had come back from being a three-time mayor of the city of New York in early 2014. And I remember running into him and having a conversation about our need to accelerate further what we're doing from a D&I and an equality point of view. And I basically said to him, I am on behalf of our three-man management committee, Tom Secunda, Mike Bloomberg, and myself, going to put in a stake in the ground and really set the tone at the top of the organization and drive this further commitment to D&I and better metrics and better numbers and continuing to kind of fuel the inclusive organization that we want, so people, regardless of their background, can bring their whole selves to what they do every single day. And so setting the tone at the top of the organization, I think, is critically important. The second thing that I would say is making sure that that there are specific plans around this, that individual leaders are held accountable for performance against those plans, that there is a consistent dialogue. Part of the problem, I think, in anything like this is when the immediacy of the event goes away, people tend to take their foot off the gas, when what they should be doing is continuing to accelerate their programs and investment in the future to ensure that this issue of diversity and inclusion is covered. I phrase it quite frequently when I talk to my colleagues yes, it is the nice thing and the right thing to do, but from a business point of view, it is really critical to our overall success as we go forward. We are in, as many people are, a war for talent around the world, and ensuring that you have access to the best talent pools is critically important. The third thing that I would say is making sure that we are benefiting from other people's experience, whether it's the 30% Club, which I started in the United States almost 7 years ago, whether I'm part of something called the CEO Initiative for Jobs in New York City that Jamie Dimon started and has really been leading. And I think there are 100 business leaders that are now involved in it, making sure that you are exchanging best practices and learning from other people. And then the fourth thing that I would say to really address it is attract the best team of leadership from a D&I perspective that you possibly can. We have an outstanding team led by a Black woman by the name of Pamela Hutchinson, who basically drives our initiatives out of London, but she's got a great team led by Chris Michel in New York, and a great team for Europe, and a great team for Asia. And they are kind of the additional catalyst to make sure that we're doing all we can to address the issue. Our premise is if we can help and do it within the company and within the communities in which we operate, we can really help attack the George Floyd type issues and really reassert the importance of Black lives and how much they matter in what we do every single day.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, those comments, Peter. And of course, I know, having read your bio in quite great depth, not only as a manager, but also as a board representative and chair of many boards, like bringing that leadership to the table and that tone from the top and pushing it down throughout the organization has really been at the front of what you've been trying to achieve. Now, in your description there, you mentioned the 30% Club. And that's the global campaign led by chairs to engage in gender diversity. And I'm really interested in what made you get involved in that. You were actually the founding chair of that, the 30% Club. And we're proud members of the 30% Club. But I'm wondering what triggered your interest and attention to that?
Mairead, I would say a couple of things. Number one, and I say this with obvious and complete sincerity, the single most important person in my life was my mother. She was a huge influence. She was my strongest supporter. She was my harshest critic. She was always there when I needed her, and a huge font of advice. And so I've lived in a family with a very strong matriarch, and that, I think, has had a significant impact in how I think about certainly gender diversity, but ethnic diversity and people of different sexual orientation and people with mental challenges, and the kind of the long list of things that we deal with to try and create the best environment we can from a DEI perspective going forward. The second thing is what happened with the 30% Club. It was started by a woman in London who you may know and or certainly be familiar with, in Helena Morrissey, longtime Bloomberg client. She was in New York 6 or 7 years ago around Christmas time, came in to see me and said, we really want to start a chapter of the 30% Club in the United States. I'd like you to consider helping. And she must have seen a change of expression on my face, because she immediately went for the order and said, I'd actually like you to be the chairman of the initiative. And I had a colleague with me and responded immediately that of course I would take on that responsibility, having no idea what it entailed and how much work it was going to be. But it kind of got kicked off from there. And we began a program. Today we have almost 100 companies, public companies, professional services organizations who are part of the program. Our public companies started off with about 22% gender diversity on their boards. They now are over 40%. So the business leaders, the CEOs, men and women and chairmen who've really been driving change, have been very proactive in doing that. We have, among other things, created a board preparation program for women. We've also created some other leadership capabilities to facilitate their movement through the organization, ultimately up to C-suite levels, and hopefully as well. Bear with me just one second. Through the 30% Club. So I think it's been, I'm not sure it certainly hasn't exceeded expectations, but I think we've done a responsible job along the way. It is similar to D&I work in our company, and I say this all the time, these issues, as you well know, as a very successful senior female, these are races without a finish line. Our work is never done. And when I get asked by my colleagues kind of how I feel about our progress, I say it's, number one, we're making progress, but it's still not acceptable. My responsibility is to be a real agitator with my colleagues about this to make sure they don't forget how important it is. But it's been a wonderful voyage, and I think we've made in our own small way a difference in elevating the level of consciousness about the importance of these issues, and the individuals, men and women who've joined the 30% Club, because it's the leaders themselves on behalf of their companies that participate, have really embraced what we're trying to accomplish. But most importantly, in that embrace, they've executed their plans successfully, and I think made a real difference. And as a consequence, their company's performance is better as a result.
So Peter, I think you mentioned something in there which was really important about men and women, and this sense of coming together to actually solve some problems as it would relate to diversity and inclusion. And I think that's a great message to pass, that it is for all of us, as well as I think you've had a very compelling argument on the war on talent and the understanding that even for businesses that perhaps don't subscribe to the belief of inclusion, diversity and equity, there is a business case that speaks to talent and bringing everybody to the table. So your leadership was clearly in evidence with respect to the 30% Club, but in many of your activities. 2020 has been a test for many leaders. The pandemic has challenged us all in ways that we never thought, whether it was just coordinating to get everyone to go on remote work, or just dealing with our customers or our employees through this crisis. From your perspective, how has the pandemic tested corporate leadership, and has it stood up to the test? Have we set the right priorities? Have you seen leaders stepping up?
We've certainly seen leaders stepping up. There's nothing better than sharpening one's skills than having a crisis. I think Winston Churchill had a quote, something to that effect. But I also think leadership is defined by crises. It's not defined by business as usual. And I think people have done a remarkable job stepping up. But what I think is the counterbalance to that is there still is a significant amount of uncertainty as to where does this thing go and how much longer does it last, and what do we as leaders have to do to our companies and institutions that we're involved in going forward to make sure that we get back to some normal pace and kind of a reasonable corporate or institutional heart rate as we go forward. So I think the jury's out to some degree. And if we were having this discussion a year from now, I think we both would be in a better position to reflect on some of the successes and some of the issues that we've been able to use as coaching opportunities or learning experiences going forward. But I think, great firms step up in difficult times. I think we have as a company, most of our customers have. I've probably in the last 11 months probably talked to over 300 of our clients around the world. And we're all wrestling with the same issues. But I think what's good is we are going through them together, and we can leverage off one another to try and come up with workable solutions that really prepare us successfully as we think about the future and additional challenges that could come up like this.
So, Peter, you've been extremely grateful with your time. I have one final question for you, as though I think we could go on for hours here. We talked about leadership, and we talked about, you've just mentioned, reaching out to customers, etc. What advice would you give to leaders that are listening to you as we start into 2021, based on your experience? What should we be thinking about? Where should we be directing our attention?
Well, I think first and foremost to our employees. Secondly, I think that the amount of communication that we need to do as senior leaders, both within our companies and externally, is critically important. And continuing to evolve the stakeholder concept as opposed to the shareholder concept, and thinking about multiple disciplines and issues. One of the things that we see literally every day is the global institutional investment community becoming ever so much more focused on ESG investing. So environmental, social, and government, corporate social responsibility, everything that goes along with that. And CEOs today and senior leaders today need to be really good athletes. They need to be able to do kind of it all. And if not, the value of their organization is going to suffer. The ability to attract and retain people is going to be much more difficult. And so I think keeping those 3 or 4 things in mind as we execute our business plans and our community outreach programs is really going to be critical to continuing success and making the kind of contributions back to the world that we do as good corporate citizens.
That was great, Peter. Thank you. And you give me a few things certainly to take away. You talked about leadership being defined by crisis. And if I could maybe add at the end, you've very clearly showed us that your leadership comes from values, and that your very strong values with respect to your people, and people as your employees, but as your customers and as your stakeholders. So thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us. It was an absolute delight to share that time with you today.
Huge pleasure for me. You did a marvelous job, and have a happy holiday, and please stay healthy and safe.